So I attempted to put this somewhere in my shop where you could see how it would sit in the customer's home, obviously on the ground versus on a table. You get a little bit of a better view of the top. So in this third video, I'm going to be showing you, it's mostly going to detail making the wooden rails for the drawer to slide on, attaching them to the aprons, as well as the dovetail detailing on the drawer. So this ended up taking up more time than I thought, so it's going to now be a 4-part series, because in the 4th part I'm going to be showing you how I decided to finish this top. The one thing the customer wanted was a matte / satin finish, and the rest was up to me, and I decided to go with an oil. Pound for pound, I think oil's the most vibrant finish you could put on hardwood especially. It just takes a lot longer than, say, a poly or any sort of wiping varnish that people usually use, because you have to wait for the oil to completely cure, which is usually about 72 hours. Some places say more, and then you can add a wax or some sort of top coat. So right now this is just about done being oiled, and then, so like I said in the 4th video, I'll show you how I finish this up. So with everything dry, I could then come through and cut the section for the drawer front. So what I decided to use was use one of those oscillating multi-tools, and I set a fence up that the back side of the blade could ride against, and I could get a nice square cut. The reason I'm using this tool is because the curve cut on this is going to be very thin. It's probably about a 1/16 of an inch, whereas most table saw blades are going to be about an 1/8 of an inch, and that curve cut would be too big, and in the end your reveal would look quite large. So I'm just riding this tool against that fence I set up against my mark. You can see I could get about 3/4 of the way down before I had to finish it up with a hand saw. You could see that one side's loose, and then I could do the other side, so I had a nice straight line and a very thin curve, which was pretty much my automatic reveal for the drawer. I wouldn't shave down any more of this apron, any of the sides. So this is the piece I test cut in order to get those wooden slides for the drawer on the inside. I ended up cutting a bigger piece because I wanted to make it slightly different, but the notches I cut out ended up working perfectly. You could also see the dovetail parts are off by about an 1/8 of an inch. They're off square by about an 1/8 of an inch. But the nice thing about adding these wooden rails after the fact is those aprons being off square won't affect the structure of the table, and I could just cheat that 1/8 of an inch when mortising out these holes for these wooden rails, and everything ended up square. So all I'm doing is marking on the front side, and those burn marks are from the multi-tool. Most of those come out with sanding, but it didn't really matter because this is the inside of the cabinet, and then I could just go through and chip away the material. And I did it this way instead of butt joining those inside rails, just so that this joint is more structural, so over time I don't have to worry about the drawer shifting. If the drawer's overweighted, you won't have to worry about it popping off or anything like that, because it's sunk into the table. So I'm just going through and creating that crevice. So this is where I fix my 1/8 inch difference. You could see that the mortise I'm cutting in the back, and this is a little 1/8 inch piece of key stock, it cheated an 1/8 of an inch up. And then I could draw my lines for mortising that out, and that's how I ended up getting these pieces square. In the back, because of the angle, I used a drill to remove some of that excess, and then I could come in with a chisel and mortise out the rest of it. So this is actually pretty quick work. The hardest part was mostly just the angle, but it's worth it in the end. It will also sure up this opening a little bit more, because it is quite a large span for the drawer. And then you can see that piece fits in there just about perfectly. It's cheated off that unsquare piece of dovetail just enough so that now this is perfectly square. You could see beforehand it's off by, it's actually a little less than an 1/8. And then when I put my piece in, which is a nice tight fit, you'll see that that's now squared up. So then I'm going to have to go through and recut these So everything's nice and square, which means the drawer should ride in here quite well. So I'm just using some scrap walnut. This walnut is actually from the table, and I'm just cutting it into 1-inch strips. I made it a little bit wider is the main difference from the piece that you saw before. So I have to remove pretty much an L out of the end of it in order to fit in there. So in order to get some nice clean cuts, I just set up a stop on my radial arm saw. This is accounting for the depth going into the table, and I just cut some curves on that edge. And then a little chip came off, so it's a little confusing looking at it there, but I just needed to remove the rest of that piece. So it's basically a little rabbit on the end of this walnut piece. You can see that's what I'm left with, and then I just have to remove that other little chunk. So like I said, these I'm making in my shop, and the original ones, they just weren't tall enough for what I needed. I wanted a little bit more wood left over in the piece for the drawer slides, so I just thickened them up, but I could use the originals to mock these up, and then I could just hand cut that little piece off, and then that's the little nub that's going to be sunk into my mortises. So all I'll have to do now is go through and cut a large rabbet, and that is what the drawer will slide on. You can see it will fit in there. Now I already knew the length and everything from the originals, and then I'm just going to cut a rabbet on there, and this rabbet part is where the drawer is actually going to slide. So you could probably cut this with a dado stack, but I think this was over about 1 inch, and my dado stack only goes up to about 1 inch. So I just cut one curve and then flipped it on its side and cut the other, and then that little piece will come out. And then that is going to be the inside slide. So there they are. You can see they're just a little bit thicker than the other ones, and that's what I wanted. So I'm not actually going to glue those in place yet, just in case I need to tweak anything. They can come out, and I could, if I have to make them they're the wrong size, or if the drawer doesn't fit, I could cut them out. So to make the drawer, I'm starting by slicing up some maple. I had this maple in my shop. This drawer is nice and small, so since I already had this maple, it was nice. I could use it without having to charge the customer to go buy some new products. And I'm going to put through dovetails in the back. I ended up, this material is about 5/8 of an inch, and I ended up planing it, but I don't show it on camera. So in order to start the dovetails, I'm using some calipers. And I'm basically making a 1/4 inch mark off the edge, getting it so that 3 of those caliper movements will get me to the other edge, and once it's perfect, I just open it up a little bit and then make marks. You can see it goes past the original mark, so then I center it on that other mark and then make new marks, just flipping the calipers. This is a method I've seen online that a lot of people that use dovetails make dovetails use, and it just gives you equal spacing on the top of that piece. So then I could go through with a sharp blade and draw 90s for those marks. You can see how the spacing is pretty much perfect. Now you could adjust the spacing depending on if you like thicker or thinner dovetails. So then I'm using an 8:1 ratio on this, so that is what I have set on my bevel gauge, and this one I actually mismarked, but it ends up not mattering. And then I could go through and transfer the marks down in order to get the mark of the tails. So I could flip it and mark there. And I'm scoring all of my pieces just so it's the saw blade can ride in that score mark a little bit. So you could see that mismark. I went on the wrong side of the line. It won't really matter because that material is getting removed. And then I make sure to mark all the material that's getting removed. Now I don't have a dovetail saw. I just have a regular Japanese pole saw. And this worked pretty well. A dovetail saw would have gave me a little bit cleaner cuts. So you'll notice in the video I usually cut shy of my mark just slightly and then clean everything up with a chisel. If you don't have a great saw or you're a little bit nervous about your sawing abilities, I highly recommend not cutting right on the line because it's easy work to clean this up with a sharp chisel. But basically I'm going through and cutting down through all those marks. And then that is what that looks like. And then I could go through and remove the two edges quite easily because there's no material on either side. And then I'm going to come through with a coping saw. Online, a lot of people use a fret saw because the blade's a little bit thinner, but I don't have one of those. I just have a coping saw, just removing as much of the excess material as possible. Now I'm going through this pretty quickly because I'm not a professional dovetail cutter. I don't cut a lot of hand cut dovetails at all. I usually use machines because I'm making a bunch of drawer boxes at once out of plywood. It just doesn't make sense to cut them by hand. So there's tons of great videos that will show you this process if you want a more detailed step-by-step guide on how to do it from people that have mastered it and are experts at doing it. So once I have most of the material cut with the coping saw, I'm going to go through to my line. The line is based on the thickness of the material, which is the other piece of maple. You can see I already pre-scored that before I started. And I'm just going to remove that material with a chisel. Once I get about halfway down, I'll flip the piece over and remove the rest so I don't have any tear out on the other side of the piece. You can see there I'm flipping it. So then once that is done, I could use that piece to mark the pins. So I have the pins in my vise, and I'm just lining that up with the edge, and then I'm going to mark it with a sharp knife. And once again, I'm going to be cutting shy of these marks. So those are the basic marks I have, and then I could raise this up and transfer those marks to the front. And then I always mark the waist because it can get a little confusing when you're cutting these to remember what is being taken away and what is being kept, because you always want to cut on the side of the waist. If you cut on the other side of the line, your tails will, and your dovetails will all be off. So same process, I can now go through and cut straight lines down to the mark line, the pre-scored line I already had on the bottom, which I said is about 5/8 of an inch. And then that is what I'm left with. You could see that I'm cutting on the inside of my marked line, and I'll clean it up with a chisel. And then once again, same process, I could use a coping saw and go through and remove the bulk of that material. Now obviously these are angled, so at some point you're going to have to cheat that coping saw to the front or the back so that you don't cut into the pin piece that you want to keep. And then I'm going to go through and repeat the process of removing that excess waste. So I'll chisel about halfway down on this side, I'll flip it, and then chisel the rest of the way. And once again, you have to angle your chisel so you're not chiseling into the pins. And then once I clean it up, I could dry fit it together. And this was actually the first dry fit. And you could see it goes together pretty well. It's a little proud, but that doesn't really matter because I could trim it up. But I was really happy with the fit of this. There was minimal gaps going on. It's a nice tight joint. So I had already done the other side, so the back was all the through dovetails, and the front are going to be half blind dovetails. So this drawer I needed to shave about a 1/16 to an 1/8 of an inch off the top so that there's a reveal at the top and it doesn't drag across the tabletop. And then I'm going about, this is a little over an inch thick, and I'm going about 7/8 of an inch deep. So I marked that, and then I could trim down the maple to size. So then this is the same exact process. I'm using those calipers. You're getting the calipers to meet your marks perfectly, and then you're making them slightly wider in order to get the equal spacing going off of both edges. And then this I'm going to go through very quickly because it's the exact same process, making these tails on the same end and then cutting them down. This one especially because I really did not want to mess up that front piece, because there was a lot of things in woodworking can be fixed, and that could be fixed, but I wanted the grain to be continuous, so it was really important to me to get these perfect. So on this one you'll see I do leave a fair amount of excess to be chiseled, just to make sure I'm not removing too much material and I get a sloppy joint. So the pencil marks even after the sawing are pretty prevalent on these ones. And then same process going through. Here's a close-up of cleaning up that edge. You can see my saw does not leave a super clean cut, but with a sharp chisel I could go through and then chisel enough until I meet those marks. And then that is what I'm left with, the front and the back. The ones in the front I made a little bit thicker than the ones in the back, just kind of playing around with the joint. So then there's my line, and then I can I'm only going down the thickness, and I don't want this top part to meet the top part of the drawer, just in case of seasonal humidity. The sides of the drawer box are not as tall as the front, so you don't have to worry about them scraping the top of the container. So that's what all those marks are for. And then I could transfer the tail marks onto here and then cut the pins. So some of this you can get with a saw. You could cut a little bit in the front and a little bit to the back to your mark in order to get this started, but most of this is chisel work because they don't go all the way through. You could see you could get a decent amount done with the marks, and then I'm going to go through and keep on chiseling. You pop off the front, and then you can work your way all the way down to your bottom line. Now in the video, when this is sped up, it looks like it's moving around a lot, and in real life it wasn't bouncing around this much. As you can see, I'm down to the bottom, and then you could still see my pencil marks. So then I'm going to go through with a sharp chisel, and you could see just how nicely, especially if you spent the time to flatten the backs of your chisels, how nicely I can get up to that mark. And then I'll keep testing this and really sneak up on the joint so that it's a nice tight fit, because this is the really important aesthetic part of the dovetails. When you pull that drawer out, you want them to be perfect. So the first fit, it was a little tight towards the back, so that's good. That's better than it being too loose. So I just removed some more material from the back of all the pieces, and then I could test fit it again, and it fit in there just about perfect. So then I could put the hammer the whole drawer together, and this is what it's going to look like. I was really happy with the way this turned out, and it slid on those rails. There's going to be some tweaking to be done, but it slid on those rails really well the first time around, and that was really nice. So the next part of the video is going to be finishing up the drawer. I didn't put it in this one because it was getting quite long, and then there's a couple little things I do to the top, and then the final finish, the oil finish, will be in the next video.